Ethan Reed lived alone in the middle of nowhere, far from the noise of any town or the laughter of other people. His small farmhouse stood in the open land of New Mexico, surrounded by fields of dry grass and red sand. The land had been in his family for 3 generations, and he worked it with quiet pride. Every day he woke up before the sun, made a pot of black coffee, and stepped out to begin his chores. He had no one to talk to except his old dog, Rusty, a loyal friend with tired eyes and a tail that wagged even on bad days. The sound of the wind passing through the dry bushes and the soft creak of the wooden porch were the only voices that filled his world. Ethan wasn't a man who complained. Life had been hard, but he had learned to take things as they came. His father had passed away when Ethan was still young, and his mother followed a few years later. Since then, he had worked the farm alone. He had learned how to fix a tractor, mend a fence, and survive the long summers when the ground cracked from heat. But even with all his strength, there was something missing. Something he could not name. He was in his late 30s now, still tall and strong, but his face carried the marks of sun and loneliness. His hands were rough, his clothes simple, and his eyes quiet, like a man who had seen many seasons pass without much change. Sometimes at night, he would sit on the front porch with Rusty lying by his feet. The stars in the desert sky were bright, brighter than anywhere else, but instead of feeling peace, he often felt a strange emptiness. He would look across the open land and wonder if life was meant to be this quiet. He had never been married. Truth was, he had never really known how to talk to women. When he was younger, he was shy and awkward, and as the years passed, he simply stopped trying. The few people who lived nearby respected him, but they saw him as distant, a man who worked too hard and spoke too little. One afternoon, Ethan drove his old pickup truck into town to buy supplies. The dusty road stretched out like a ribbon, and the wind carried bits of sand that brushed against his face. When he reached the small general store, he parked and went inside. People greeted him kindly but briefly. They all knew Ethan Reed, the quiet farmer who lived alone and never caused trouble. While he waited in line to pay for his groceries, he noticed a young couple laughing together, sharing a small bag of chips and holding hands. Something inside him tightened, not out of jealousy but from a deep sense of missing something he'd never had. Driving back home, the thought stayed with him. He told himself he didn't need anyone, but the silence that greeted him when he stepped inside the house made that lie hard to believe. The house felt bigger than it was, the kind of quiet that seemed to press against his chest. He turned on the small radio on the kitchen shelf. A soft country song played, talking about love and second chances. He smiled sadly, shaking his head. "Not for me," he murmured, pouring a cup of coffee. Rusty wagged his tail as if agreeing that the two of them were just fine on their own. But deep down, Ethan knew he wanted more. Not excitement, not big adventures, just someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone who could make the house feel alive again. Days turned into weeks. The summer heat grew stronger. Ethan worked the fields from dawn to dusk, sweat running down his neck and dust clinging to his clothes. He repaired fences, fed the cattle, and checked the crops that struggled to grow in the dry soil. Each evening he sat on the porch watching the horizon turn orange and red as the sun dipped behind the hills. The beauty of it was breathtaking, but it also reminded him how alone he was. Then came the night that changed everything. The air was heavy and strange that evening, the kind that tells you a storm is coming. The wind picked up, pushing dark clouds across the sky. Rusty started barking, pacing near the door. Ethan looked up from his dinner, a simple bowl of stew, and stepped outside. The sky had turned dark gray, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He hurried to tie the barn doors shut and make sure the animals were safe. Just as he finished, he noticed something moving far down the dirt road, a small figure walking through the rain that had just begun to fall. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as lightning flashed, he saw clearly it was a person. Someone was out there struggling against the storm. Without thinking twice, Ethan ran inside, grabbed his coat, and jumped into his truck. As he drove closer, he saw that it was a young woman drenched from head to toe, holding her arms around herself for warmth. The rain hit the windshield hard and the wind howled through the open fields. Ethan stopped the truck beside her, rolled down the window and shouted, "You okay?" "Get in. You'll catch your death out here." She hesitated for a second, then nodded and climbed in, shivering. Ethan turned the heater on and handed her an old blanket from behind the seat. Her dark hair was wet, sticking to her face, and her clothes were muddy. Yet even through the rain and the dirt, there was something striking about her. Her sharp eyes, proud yet tired, and the calm strength in the way she held herself. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back. I tried to walk to the next town, but the storm caught me." Ethan nodded, focusing on the road as he turned the truck toward his farmhouse. "You did the right thing stopping. It's a long way to town from here, and the storm's just getting started." She smiled faintly. "I didn't think anyone lived out here." He chuckled quietly. "Not many do." When they reached his house, Ethan helped her inside. The wind slammed the door shut behind them. He handed her a towel and motioned toward the fire he quickly built in the old stone fireplace. Rusty came over, sniffed her curiously, then wagged his tail. She smiled at the dog and crouched to pet him. "He's sweet. Best company I've had in years," Ethan said, half joking but mostly serious. As she warmed her hands by the fire, Ethan finally asked, "What's your name?" "Naya," she replied. "I was visiting family a few towns over. I'm Apache. I was heading back home when my car stopped running." Ethan nodded slowly. "Well, Naya, you're welcome to stay here till the storm passes. It's not safe to go back out tonight." For a moment she looked uncertain, perhaps not used to trusting strangers. But something in Ethan's calm voice made her relax. "Thank you," she said again, this time with a small, genuine smile. Ethan felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the warmth of another person in his home, or the sound of her voice breaking the long silence that had filled his days. He wasn't sure. As the rain poured outside and the fire crackled softly, the lonely farmhouse no longer felt empty. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning, and though he didn't know it yet, this quiet act of kindness, stopping to help a stranger, would change his life forever. The rain did not stop all night. It came down hard, drumming on the roof, flooding the small path outside the farmhouse. The wind howled like a wild spirit across the open land. Ethan added more wood to the fire, its orange glow filling the small living room with a gentle warmth. Naya sat near the fire, wrapped in one of Ethan's old blankets. Steam rose from her wet clothes that hung by the fireplace to dry. Her long, dark hair, now half dry, fell softly over her shoulders. Rusty, Ethan's old dog, rested beside her feet, already trusting the stranger. Ethan made 2 cups of tea, something he rarely did for anyone but himself. He placed one in front of her and sat down quietly on the chair across from her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire and the sound of rain filled the silence between them. "Thank you again," Naya said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. "If you hadn't come by, I don't know what would have happened." Ethan shook his head. "Anyone would have stopped." She looked at him and smiled a little. "Not everyone does." He didn't have an answer for that. Maybe she was right. Maybe most people would have kept driving, thinking it wasn't their problem. But Ethan had spent too many years alone not to understand how hard it is when no one stops to help. "You live here all by yourself?" Naya asked after a moment. "Yeah," he said, taking a sip of his tea. "Been that way for a while. My folks passed and the farm's all I've got left." Her eyes softened. "That must get lonely sometimes." Ethan gave a small, shy smile. "You could say that." They talked a bit more. Small things at first. About the land, the weather, the kind of crops he grew. She told him she had grown up in a small Apache village not far from the mountains. Her family raised horses, and she sometimes traveled to nearby towns to sell crafts and herbs made by her people. As she spoke, her voice carried a calm strength, and Ethan found himself listening closely. He liked the way she spoke, steady, gentle, full of warmth. She wasn't afraid of silence either. She seemed to understand that sometimes silence could be peaceful, not awkward. After a while, Naya yawned softly, clearly tired. Ethan stood up and motioned toward the small guest room. "You can rest in there," he said. "The bed's clean. I'll stay out here," she hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to take your space," he nodded. "It's fine. You've had a long day." Naya smiled a little shyly this time. "Thank you, Ethan. You've been very kind." When she disappeared into the small room, Ethan sat by the fire again, staring at the flames. It had been a long time since another person's voice had filled his home. The quiet was no longer empty. It felt alive, Krusty looked up at him and wagged his tail as if saying, "It's good, isn't it?" Ethan smiled and scratched the dog's head. "Yeah, boy," he whispered. "It is." The next morning, the storm had not completely passed. The sky was heavy with clouds and the ground was soaked with water. Ethan was already outside when Naya came out, wearing one of his old shirts and jeans he'd lent her so she could dry her own clothes. "You shouldn't be out there," she said. Watching him hammer a loose board back onto the fence, he smiled. "If I waited for perfect weather, I'd never get anything done." She laughed, a sound so light and cheerful that Ethan almost forgot what laughter felt like. She walked over to help him, holding the board in place while he nailed it down. For a while they worked side by side, quietly but comfortably like they'd known each other for years. When they came back inside, Ethan cooked breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee. It wasn't much, but Naya smiled as if it were the best meal she'd had in a long time. "You can cook," she said playfully. "I can feed myself," Ethan replied with a half-smile. That's about it. The hours passed slowly. Rain came and went, but the road stayed flooded. Ethan checked the radio. The weather report said the storm might last another day or two. Naya didn't seem worried. She sat by the window watching the drops slide down the glass. "I used to love the rain when I was little," she said. "My grandmother said it was the earth washing away old pain." Ethan looked at her quietly. "That's a nice way to see it," she nodded. She believed everything in nature had a spirit, even storms. She said sometimes the wind carries messages we can't hear. He smiled faintly. "Guess I've never thought of it that way. To me, a storm just means more work fixing fences." Naya chuckled softly. Maybe both can be true. They spent the day talking in bits and pieces. She told him stories about her tribe, how her people respected the land, how they saw the world as one big family of humans, animals, and spirits. Ethan listened, fascinated. He had always loved his land, but he had never thought about it the way she described it, like it was alive, like it had a heart. In return, he shared small pieces of his own life. How he grew up on this farm, how his parents used to dance in the kitchen when they were young, how he had learned to find comfort in the simple things. When evening came, the rain stopped for a while. The sky turned pink and gold as the sun slipped through the clouds. Naya stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. Ethan followed, standing beside her. The land looked fresh, washed clean by the rain. The air smelled of wet soil and desert sage. For a long moment, they both just stood there in silence, watching the light fade behind the hills. "It's beautiful," Naya said quietly. Ethan nodded. "It always is, but I guess I stopped noticing." "Sometimes," she said softly, "we stop seeing the things that are always there." Her words stayed with him even after they went back inside. That night, when he lay down on the couch, he thought about how different the last 2 days had felt. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew one thing. Her presence had brought something into his life that he didn't realize he was missing. The next morning, the sun finally came out, bright and clean. Naya's clothes were dry and her car, still stuck down the road, needed to be fixed. Ethan offered to help her. They walked together, Rusty trotting behind. The road was muddy, but the air was fresh. When they reached the car, Ethan checked under the hood. "Looks like the battery's gone," he said. "You won't get far without a new one," Naya sighed. "I guess I'll have to wait until someone from town drives by." Ethan thought for a moment. "I've got an extra in the shed. It should fit." "Give me a few minutes," she smiled gratefully. "You don't have to do that," he shrugged. "I know, but I want to." When he came back with the spare battery, she helped him install it. The car started with a soft rumble, and Naya clapped her hands together with joy. "You're a miracle worker," she said, laughing. Ethan chuckled. "Just a farmer who fixes things." She looked at him with a kind expression. "No, not just that. You're a good man, Ethan." He didn't know what to say. Compliments were rare for him, and this one felt different. It felt honest. When the time came for her to leave, they stood for a moment by her car. The wind had turned warm, carrying the smell of the desert after rain. "Thank you for everything," she said. "For the food, for the roof, for helping me." Ethan nodded slowly. "You don't owe me anything." Naya smiled gently. "Maybe not, but kindness like yours deserves to be remembered." She got into her car, rolled down the window, and added softly, "I hope we meet again." Then she drove off down the dusty road, her car disappearing into the golden morning light. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching until she was out of sight. The farm was quiet again, only the sound of the wind and the call of a distant bird. But something inside him had changed. The air didn't feel as heavy. The silence didn't feel as empty. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself smiling for no reason at all. He didn't know when or how, but he knew this wasn't the end of their story. Somewhere deep down he could feel it, the quiet promise of something new waiting just beyond the horizon. Days turned into weeks, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Naya. Every morning when the sun rose over the hills and painted the sky gold, he found himself remembering her smile. Sometimes he would glance at the road, half hoping to see a familiar car coming toward the farmhouse, but the road stayed empty, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. He tried to push her from his mind, telling himself she had her own life to live. Yet everything around him seemed to remind him of her. The sound of rain on the roof, the smell of sage after a storm, even the warmth of the morning light that touched his fields. It was as if her presence still lingered, like a gentle echo that refused to fade. Ethan went on with his daily work. He fixed the fences, watered the crops, and took care of Rusty. But something inside him had changed. The world didn't feel as lonely as before. He caught himself humming while he worked or smiling at small things he used to overlook. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. One afternoon, as he was repairing the barn door, he heard the distant sound of a car engine. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up. Down the dirt road, a blue car was slowly making its way toward the farmhouse. His heart beat a little faster. He didn't want to believe it. But when the car stopped and the door opened, there she was. Naya stepped out, her long dark hair shining in the sun. She was carrying 2 woven baskets filled with herbs, dried flowers, and small jars. Rusty barked excitedly and ran toward her, wagging his tail. Naya laughed and bent down to pet him. Ethan walked over, trying not to show how happy he felt. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said with a small smile. "I told you I might come back," she said warmly. "I wanted to thank you properly, and I thought maybe you could use a little company." Ethan chuckled softly. "You thought right." She handed him one of the baskets. "These are for you. Some herbs from my village. They're good for cooking, and some are for tea. The elders asked me to bring them to thank you for helping me." He took the basket carefully, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Kindness deserves kindness." They spent the afternoon together. Naya helped him in the garden, showing him how to mix the herbs into the soil to make it richer. She told him which plants could heal cuts or calm a fever. Ethan listened closely, amazed by how much she knew. "You must really love the land," he said. She smiled. "My people taught me that everything in nature is connected. When you take care of the land, it takes care of you." Ethan looked at the dry earth beneath his boots. "I guess I've always believed that too. Just never said it out loud." For the first time in years, the farm felt alive with laughter and talk. Naya's gentle voice filled the air as she told stories about her tribe, about how her grandmother used to sing to the stars, and how children were taught to listen to the wind. Ethan shared his own memories, telling her about his father's old songs and his mother's cooking, about the days when the farmhouse was full of life. They cooked dinner together that evening, roasted vegetables, cornbread, and tea made from her herbs. The air was warm, the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the house glowed softly under the golden light. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the stars appear. The night was still and peaceful, and for a while neither of them spoke. "It's strange," Ethan said finally, his voice low. "I've lived here all my life, but tonight it feels different." Naya turned to him.
Different how?
He thought for a moment. "Like it's not just a house anymore. Like it's alive again." Naya smiled gently. "Maybe it's always been alive. It just needed someone to remind you." Her words struck something deep in him. He realized how much her presence had changed things, not just in the house, but in him. For years he had lived like a man waiting for nothing. Now he found himself looking forward to every sunrise. Over the next few days, Naya stayed at the farm, helping him with chores and teaching him more about herbs and plants. She showed him how to grow aloe for healing and how to use wild mint to keep insects away. Ethan showed her how to drive the old tractor and fix the water pump. They worked together easily, talking, laughing, and sometimes falling into comfortable silence. The bond between them grew naturally, quietly, like roots spreading beneath the earth. One morning while they were tending to the vegetable garden, Naya stopped and looked around. "This place has good energy," she said. "It feels peaceful." Ethan smiled. "You make it that way," she laughed lightly. "Maybe we both do." When she wasn't working, Naya liked to walk around the land, collecting herbs and flowers. Sometimes Ethan would watch her from a distance, her figure moving gracefully through the golden grass. He admired the way she seemed at home in nature, how she listened to the world around her like it was speaking directly to her. One evening, a storm started to form again in the distance. Dark clouds rolled over the hills and thunder echoed faintly. Ethan looked worried, remembering the last storm. Naya noticed and smiled softly. "Don't worry. Not every storm brings trouble. Some just remind us to slow down." They watched the rain together from the porch. The drops fell softly, tapping against the roof. Rusty slept at their feet, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Ethan turned to her and said quietly, "You know, I've lived here for years, but I've never felt this place the way I do now." She looked at him with kind eyes. "Because before you were surviving. Now you're living." Her words stayed with him long after the rain stopped. He realized she was right. For the first time in years, he wasn't just existing. He was feeling, learning, connecting. The walls that loneliness had built inside him were beginning to crumble. As the days passed, they grew even closer. They shared stories by the fire, watched the stars at night, and laughed over simple things. Ethan noticed how her laughter made the whole house brighter, how her presence seemed to fill every corner with warmth. One afternoon, while Naya was packing some herbs to take back to her village, Ethan felt a heaviness in his chest. He knew she would leave soon, and the thought of the house returning to silence felt unbearable. "Will you come back?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at him and smiled softly. "Do you want me to?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." Her smile grew warmer. "Then I will." That evening, they shared a quiet dinner. Neither of them said much, but everything they needed to say was in the way they looked at each other. When the morning came, Naya loaded her baskets into her car. The sun was rising, painting the land with soft light. She turned to him before getting in. "Thank you, Ethan. For the food, for the company, for letting me be here." Ethan took a slow breath. "You don't have to thank me. You've done more for me than you know." Naya's eyes softened. "Then we've both been blessed." She reached out her hand and he took it gently. Her touch was warm, steady, real, something he hadn't felt in years. Then she got into her car, waved, and drove away, leaving behind the faint scent of sage and the promise of return. Ethan stood there long after she was gone, the morning wind brushing against his face. He looked around at his land, his home, and felt something new bloom inside him. The loneliness that had once weighed on his heart was no longer there. In its place was hope, quiet, steady, and alive. He knew she would come back. And until then, he would keep his farm alive, not just for himself, but for the life she had brought back into it. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan smiled softly to himself. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alive, not because someone had saved him, but because someone had reminded him what it meant to feel. The weeks that followed Naya's departure were quiet, but Ethan's life had already begun to change. The farmhouse no longer felt like an empty shell. It felt alive with the memory of her laughter, her stories, and the warmth she had left behind. He found himself walking through the fields, imagining her beside him, guiding him with her gentle hands, pointing out herbs he hadn't noticed before, or teaching him small ways to care for the land differently. Every evening, he would sit on the porch with Rusty at his feet, staring at the distant horizon, hoping to see her car appear down the dusty road. Sometimes he shook his head at his own foolishness. "She has her own life, Ethan," he would tell himself. "You can't expect her to stay just because you want her to." But the longing never left. It grew quietly, like a small fire in his chest that refused to go out. He remembered every detail, the sound of her voice, the way her dark eyes sparkled when she laughed, the scent of sage that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her presence had stirred something deep within him, something he hadn't known was missing until it was there. Then one bright morning, it happened. Ethan was checking the irrigation system when he saw a familiar blue car coming down the road. His heart skipped a beat and he dropped the wrench he was holding. Rusty barked and ran toward the road, his tail wagging furiously. As the car stopped and the engine clicked off, Ethan saw her stepping out, baskets in her hands once again. "Naya," he called, his voice a mixture of disbelief and joy. She looked up, smiled warmly, and waved. "I told you I'd come back," she said softly. Ethan felt a rush of relief and happiness. He hurried down the small hill, his boots kicking up dust, and met her halfway. You really did," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I promised," she said, her smile steady and genuine. "And I wanted to make sure you were okay." Ethan took the basket she carried. "You didn't have to bring all this." "They're gifts," she said lightly. "For the farm. And for you." He shook his head, touched by her thoughtfulness. "You really didn't need to do this." "I wanted to," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And I wanted to be here. With you." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Her words settled over him like sunlight breaking through clouds. He had spent so long alone that he didn't know how to respond to kindness, let alone affection. Yet something in her calm presence made him feel that it was okay to open his heart. Over the next few days, Naya settled into the farmhouse comfortably, as though she had always belonged there. She arranged her baskets of herbs and flowers neatly in the kitchen, filled jars with dried mint, chamomile, and lavender, and began teaching Ethan more about their uses. She showed him how to make teas that could soothe aches and pains, how to mix herbs to keep insects away naturally, and how to use the soil and plants together to grow stronger crops. Ethan listened carefully, eager to learn but also grateful for her company. For the first time, he realized that life could be shared, that work didn't have to be lonely and quiet, and that laughter could fill the spaces he had thought would always be empty. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Naya paused and looked around. The sun was warm on her skin, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth from the recent rain. "This farm is beautiful," she said softly. "You take good care of it." Ethan shrugged. "I try. It's not perfect, but it works." "Perfect isn't necessary," she said with a gentle smile. "Love and care are what matter. And this place has both, from you at least." Her words made Ethan smile. "I never thought anyone would notice. I've been doing this for years without anyone seeing it." "Well," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I see it now." The bond between them deepened as the days passed. They worked side by side, cooked together, and sometimes just sat in silence, listening to the wind or watching the sun set over the hills. It was a quiet, gentle life, but full of warmth. Every moment with her felt alive, and every shared smile or laugh reminded Ethan that he had been missing more than he had realized. One evening, as the sky turned pink and orange with the sunset, Ethan and Naya sat on the porch, sipping tea made from her herbs. Rusty lay at their feet, his tail twitching occasionally. "You know," Naya said softly, "I've always believed that when someone enters your life unexpectedly, they bring lessons you need to learn." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "What lesson do you think I needed?" She smiled. "That life is better when shared. That kindness matters, and that sometimes love comes when you least expect it." Her words touched him deeply. He realized she was right. Before Naya came into his life, he had been living only to survive, tending to his farm, keeping his house in order, and filling his days with routine. But now he felt joy again, hope again, and even the smallest things seemed brighter and more meaningful. Over the next few weeks, they built a routine together. Naya would rise early, gathering herbs while Ethan tended the fields. They would work side by side, sharing stories and laughter. In the evenings, they cooked together, trying new recipes with the herbs she brought from her village. Sometimes they would take long walks across the farm, watching the sun sink behind the hills, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan began to notice the little things. The way Naya's hand brushed against his when handing him a basket, the soft smile she gave when she was amused, and the quiet way she listened to him when he shared memories of his childhood or stories of his parents. Every gesture, every laugh, every shared moment built a connection that felt both natural and rare. One night, a storm started rolling in from the west. Dark clouds filled the sky and lightning lit up the hills in quick flashes. Ethan checked the animals, ensuring they were safe in the barn. Naya helped him, calmly moving through the wind and rain with confidence. "You're brave," Ethan said, watching her steady hands and calm demeanor. She shrugged with a small smile. "I've had practice. My people taught me to respect nature, not fear it. The storm passed quickly, leaving the farm sparkling with rain and fresh energy. They stood on the porch watching the sky clear and the stars appear, the wind carrying the scent of wet soil and flowers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched, feeling the quiet beauty of the moment. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I'm glad you came back." Naya turned to him, her eyes soft and kind. "I'm glad I did too." They shared a long, quiet moment, realizing that life had given them something rare. Not just companionship, but understanding, trust, and the gentle beginnings of love. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to see the farm in a new light. Every plant, every stone, every small corner of the land seemed alive, not just because of the work he put into it, but because of the shared life growing between him and Naya. She had brought warmth, laughter, and color back into a place that had been quiet for too long. He realized that he didn't just want her to visit. He wanted her to stay. Not out of loneliness, but because life was better when shared with someone who understood you, someone who cared, someone whose presence could make even the simplest chores feel meaningful. One afternoon, as they finished planting new herbs, Naya paused and looked at him with a soft smile. "This farm, it feels like home now," she said. Ethan felt a swell in his chest. "It does, because of you." She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe we make it a home together." For the first time, Ethan realized that he didn't just want her presence. He wanted her life intertwined with his. And though the thought was new and thrilling, it felt perfectly natural. As the sun set, painting the farm in warm, golden hues, they walked toward the farmhouse side by side. Rusty ran ahead, barking joyfully. Ethan looked at Naya and smiled, realizing that the quiet life he had once accepted was now filled with hope, love, and the promise of something extraordinary. For the first time in his life, he knew that the farm, his home, his life, his solitude, had room for something more. And that something more had a name, Naya. Spring arrived slowly, bringing new life to the farm. The trees began to bloom, the fields turned green, and flowers appeared in places that had been brown and dry for years. Ethan walked through the farm each morning, noticing every change in the land with a renewed sense of care. But what made his heart feel the most alive was not the crops or the warm sun. It was Naya. She had stayed on the farm, not just as a visitor, but as a part of his life. Every morning she would rise early, gather herbs, and help Ethan with the daily chores. She taught him how to make tea from the wild plants around the farm, how to dry flowers for decoration, and even how to care for Rusty in ways he had never thought of before. Their routine had grown into something comforting, simple yet full of connection and laughter. Ethan often caught himself staring at her while she worked. There was a grace in the way she moved, a strength in the way she carried herself, and a gentle kindness in every word she spoke. He realized that life had been dull before she came, not because the world was empty, but because he had not shared it with someone who understood him so deeply. One afternoon, Naya suggested they plant a new vegetable patch together. Ethan smiled, feeling a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. "Let's do it," he said. They worked side by side, turning the soil, planting seeds, and watering the young sprouts. Rusty ran around them, chasing butterflies and barking happily, his joy reflecting their own. As the day went on, the sun began to dip low, painting the farm in warm, golden light. Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at Naya. "You've changed everything here," he said softly. She looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his. "We've changed everything," she said. "Together." For a long moment they just stood there, feeling the breeze on their faces and listening to the soft sounds of the farm. Ethan realized that he had never been happier. The loneliness he had felt for years was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady joy. That evening they cooked dinner together. Naya showed him how to use herbs to flavor the vegetables, and Ethan prepared the bread. They laughed as they worked, spilling flour and tasting herbs along the way. By the time they sat down to eat, the farmhouse felt warmer than ever. Not because of the fire, but because of the shared life growing inside it. After dinner, they went outside to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air smelled of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Rusty lay at their feet, his tail occasionally wagging as if he understood the importance of the moment. "You know," Naya said softly, "I used to think life was about survival. But now I see it's about love, about connection, about finding someone who makes your world brighter. Ethan looked at her and nodded. I understand now. You've taught me that. I never knew life could feel like this. Her hand brushed against his, and for a moment the world felt still. They both knew what words could not fully express, the depth of care, respect, and love that had grown between them over these weeks. Days turned into weeks, and the farm flourished under their care. Crops grew stronger, the animals were healthy, and even Rusty seemed happier, as if he sensed the peace and love surrounding him. Ethan and Naya continued to share their lives, learning from each other, teaching each other, and building a life together. Ethan began to understand that love was not just about grand gestures or dramatic events. It was in the small things, the way she smiled when the sun hit her face, the way they laughed over simple mistakes in the kitchen, the way she quietly supported him when he felt unsure. Love was gentle, steady, and kind, and it filled the spaces in his heart he had thought would always remain empty. One afternoon, Naya suggested they take a walk to the nearby hills. Ethan agreed, eager to spend time with her outside the routine of the farm. They walked slowly, the sun warm on their backs, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh grass. They talked about the future, about the life they wanted to build together, about the farm, about travel, and about family. Ethan realized that he wanted her not just in this moment, but in every moment to come. He wanted her laughter to fill the farmhouse, her stories to guide their days, and her love to shape their lives. As they reached the top of the hill, Naya turned to him and smiled. You know, she said, life has a way of surprising us. Just when you think you're alone, it gives you something beautiful. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face. Yes, he said softly. And I think the most beautiful part is sharing it with someone who understands you. She reached for his hand and he held it firmly. I want to be with you, she said. I want that too, he replied. They stood together, watching the sun set over the hills, feeling the quiet magic of the moment. It was not a dramatic scene, not a perfect fairy tale. It was real, simple, and true. And that was exactly what made it perfect. As the weeks passed, they continued to build their life together. Naya helped Ethan organize the farmhouse, decorate it with her handmade crafts, and tend to the land with new energy and love. Ethan showed her how to fix the old machinery, care for the animals, and manage the farm's daily routines. Together they created a rhythm, a life filled with laughter, warmth, and purpose. One evening, as they sat on the porch with Rusty at their feet, Ethan realized just how much his life had changed. The farm was no longer a place of solitude. It was a home filled with love. The fields, the animals, the house, and the sky all seemed brighter, alive with possibility. And most importantly, Naya was there. Not as a guest, but as a partner, a friend, and the love of his life. I never thought I'd feel this way, Ethan said quietly, looking at her. Feel what way? Naya asked, tilting her head. Alive, he said simply. Happy, complete. You've brought all of that to me. Naya smiled softly, her eyes warm. And you've brought the same to me. This farm, this life. It feels like home because we share it. Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently. I want us to keep building this life together, always. Her eyes shone with emotion. I want that too. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft sounds of the farm, birds singing, Rusty stretching beside him, and Naya moving quietly in the kitchen. He watched her for a moment, feeling gratitude fill his heart. She had come into his life unexpectedly, bringing warmth, laughter, and love. She had turned his lonely farm into a home, and his quiet heart into one capable of joy. Over the months, their life together continued to grow. The farm prospered under their care, and they found joy in each day's simple tasks. They shared meals, worked side by side, and explored the hills and fields surrounding the farm. Sometimes they would sit silently, watching the sun rise or set, feeling peace in each other's presence. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Ethan and Naya stood on the porch, Rusty at their feet. The farm stretched out before them, green, vibrant, and alive. Ethan looked at her, feeling the depth of his gratitude and love. Thank you, he said softly, for everything. For coming into my life, for staying, for teaching me what it means to truly live. Naya took his hand and smiled. And thank you for opening your heart. for letting me be a part of your life, for sharing this farm, this world, and this love with me." They stood together hand in hand, watching the sky turn from gold to deep purple. The farm, once a place of solitude, was now filled with life, laughter, and love. And in that quiet, perfect moment, Ethan realized that he had found more than he had ever imagined: a partner, a friend, a love that would last a lifetime. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving a sky full of stars. Ethan and Naya stood together, feeling the warmth of the day fade into the peaceful night. The wind whispered through the trees, the animals settled in for the evening, and the farmhouse glowed softly in the moonlight. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly complete. The farm was no longer just his inheritance or his work. It was a home filled with life, love, and hope. And standing beside him was Naya, the Apache beauty who had changed everything, teaching him that life is best lived together, with kindness, trust, and an open heart. And as they held hands, looking out over the land they both loved, Ethan knew one thing for certain: the best days of his life were still ahead, and he would face them with Naya by his side forever.